On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors have selected Christian Koloko, the center out of Arizona, with the 33rd overall pick. We'll talk about the pick, we'll talk about the lack of an OG Anunoby trade, and we'll dig into some of the upside that could be at play with Christian Koloko. We'll hear a clip from Rafael Barlowe on this very show from a couple weeks ago talking about Koloko, and then Mark Schindler, our very good friend from Basketball News and all over the place, joins us to give the lowdown on Koloko as well. He's an exceptionally big fan of the fit, so we'll get to all of that on today's episode as we get to know Christian Koloko here on Locked On Raptors. Thanks for being here.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1202 of Locked On Raptors for Friday, June the 24th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors, and you can follow, subscribe to, rate, review the podcast on all your favorite podcast apps for the low, low price of On the House. And if you go to YouTube, you can also subscribe for free to see video versions of the show each and every day. Just go over to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel, hit the big red subscribe button, and join the nearly 2,200 satisfied customers who have jumped over and made the YouTube plunge. Even if you're not going to watch on video every day, just do it so we can boost those subscriber numbers, baby. Okay. On today's show, which is, of course, your first listen of the day, we are talking all about Christian Koloko, the pick made by the Toronto Raptors, 33rd overall in the second round last night. We'll dig into why I think it was kind of a perfect night for the Raptors when it comes to the draft, because it was nice and quiet and chill, and I was able to go to bed at like 11:30 p.m. It was fantastic. We will also get into a chat with Mark Schindler, our pal from Basketball News, and get into the nitty-gritty of Koloko and all that and so much more coming up today. Let's first dive in, however, to sort of my big takeaway from the night for the Raptors, which is that I think things went exactly as you should have wanted them to go if you're a fan of the Toronto Raptors. I said on yesterday's podcast that the best thing you could hope for from that night, from Thursday night of the draft, was silence. Outside of the 33rd pick, just quietness from the Raptors, because they are not in a position where they need to go do loud things. They are not the Sacramento Kings. They are not the Charlotte Hornets. They are not the Pistons or the Knicks, who need to be sort of the big winners of draft night because they have nothing else. The Raptors were in a pretty good spot going into the last night. 33rd overall, as we spoke about with Sam Ferris on Wednesday's podcast, was a pretty good spot to be, considering there was a range in this draft, according to most experts, from about 15 or 20 down to 40 or 45, where there were just first-round talents still going to be there, and guys who could have gone in any kind of order. The Raptors were going to have someone good fall to them. There were other good players in addition to Koloko available to them at 33. They had a nice little pick of the litter of who they wanted to go with that selection. And they ultimately land on Christian Koloko, the 7-foot center out of Arizona, 7'5" wingspan, spent 3 years playing at Arizona. His last season, kind of his first season, really kind of emerging. He's only played basketball for about 5 years. He's one of these, another soccer convert, actually, from the same hometown as Pascal Siakam in Douala, Cameroon, which is pretty awesome as well. And the Raptors seem to have a type when it comes to dudes with that soccer background and the mobility that seems to tend to lend to NBA basketball. Christian Koloko kind of fits that bill. He's a super mobile center for his size, very athletic, a really nice vertical, shot blocker and stuff like that. Getting to watch a little bit of his clips today, the defense really, really does pop off the screen. He was the defensive player of the year in the Pac-12 as well. Seems like a very Raptors-y selection where it's defense first. The offense might come later on, but there's going to be a baseline for defense that's really high. And also, to satiate all the center-hungry people out there, he's a center. He's the tallest player on the Raptors now. He's 7 feet tall. What a wonderful thing to see. It's also nice that they got a couple of sort of, center-related skills that are kind of lacking on the roster, including rim protection and, of course, work as a role man as well, which the Raptors don't have a ton of. We'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty of his game a little bit later on with Mark. And, of course, we're going to play a clip from Rafael Barlowe from a couple of weeks ago to dig into, or just to kind of remind you what his readout on Koloko was when we chatted with him a couple weeks back. But, again, back to my sort of original point. This is the kind of night you should have hoped for for the Raptors. You don't leave this draft feeling like the Raptors, kind of got screwed by trading down in the draft either. They were at the 20th pick. They traded down to 33 in the Thad deal. That could have potentially gone wrong, but it does really seem like the Raptors got a guy who they might have taken at 20 anyway. Bobby Webster said Koloko was in their top 20 to 25 on their big board, and so, I think their gamble that trading down to get Thad Young in the door, just those 13 spots, was not going to prevent them from getting a player that they really liked. And maybe you liked Blake Wesley or Caleb Houston or Christian Brown or one of those guys who went in that 20 to the 33 range. And that's fair. If you kind of hitched your wagon to a guy, that's fine. But I think for the Raptors, like, they seem to be pretty comfortable with what they've done here. And I also think, too, yes, it's a second round pick. Yes, there's always uncertainty, and there's sort of baked in uncertainty just with the nature of how second round contracts work and things like that. There is no guarantee here that Christian Koloko is going to be a long-term NBA player. However, it does really feel like this pick at 33 kind of has the tone and tenor of a first rounder, more so than sort of the dart throws that you typically see or have seen from the Raptors later in the second round. Last year, David Johnson and Delano Banton back-to-back in the mid-40s. Banton seems like he might be something. Johnson didn't do a whole lot this year. I don't know if we'll see any more of him with the Raptors organization. We'll see, but that's always kind of the risk you take when you're drafting late in the second round. You got DeJuan Hernandez a couple years ago. That didn't work out. Jalen Harris a couple years ago. That sort of looked like it might maybe work out, but doesn't seem like it's actually going to work out, or it hasn't worked out, whatever. With Koloko, this feels more like a guy who has a first-round grade, a guy who's going to get a lot more runway and rope and opportunity because he was the Raptors' only pick this season. And I think they viewed this 33rd pick as a first-round pick for all intents and purposes, outside of the financial commitment that comes with getting drafted in the first round. So, yeah, there's going to be like a shorter runway here to figure out if Koloko is something the Raptors want to go forward with. If, after 2 seasons or whatever kind of deal he signs, they realize, oh, maybe this isn't going to work out. Maybe they cut bait a little sooner. But I really think that there's going to be like a runway here for Koloko because this feels like a first-round pick more so than anything else. And I think the big takeaway for me, the reason I'm feeling so good and the reason why this should be a night that you should feel happy about as a Raptors fan, is that it suggests something about the offseason that I think is good. And that is that this might be all they do for the center position this offseason. Like, this might be what opens up the runway for 30 minutes of Precious Achiuwa at center. We'll get to the conversation with Mark later, but Mark told me he thinks Koloko can play 10 to 15 minutes a game next season and actually be a contributor because of that high defensive floor that he brings. And if that's the case, the center issues get a lot less issue-y, right? Like, Precious Achiuwa going out there, playing 30 minutes a night, doing the things that he does defensively, adding the offensive pop that he does, like, that to me is like priority number 1 for the center spot this year. And bringing in Koloko as that back layer of, a developmental piece who you can kind of dream on a little bit down the line, maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now when the Raptors are kind of hitting their real sort of apex of their win curve. He's actually like a legitimate piece in your center rotation that you can count on for 20 minutes. Maybe he's a starter by then. We don't really know. But I do think next year, for me, one of the biggest priorities is ensuring Precious Achiuwa has a ton of runway, and Koloko is not going to come in and threaten that. He's just going to be there to complement that. And, if there's someone who should feel threatened, it's probably Ken Birch, honestly, just based on, the upside that Koloko might bring and the fact that the Raptors might be pretty invested here in trying to get him some run and development time. But I think this kind of puts to bed any sort of, and look, you're not going to not trade for a star center just because you drafted a guy 33rd overall. I'm not that stupid, but I do think it suggests that they're not like itching right now to go and get a Gobert or an Ayton necessarily. It feels like, all right, we're fine with what we have here. We'll kick the can down the road a little bit. If there's a center who comes up a year from now who kind of fits the bill of a superstar center, as was pointed out by Jake Fisher last night in his reporting, the Raptors were never going to trade OG for anything other than like a star center upgrade. And I kind of think the fact that he didn't get dealt last night, the fact that they took Koloko, he's going to be that backup center, ideally as soon as next season, and maybe, he from day one he kind of gets in there. We'll see. I would expect that there's going to be some growing pains because every second round pick is going to have some growing pains, and it's going to take some time to establish a foothold. But I really feel like that move last night to take Koloko at 33, to not trade OG Anunoby, it's just kind of a further doubling down of the, all right, let's just let this thing ride out and see what happens next season with who is already in-house, We don't need to go worry about making some big win curve accelerating trade right now for a center. Instead, we can just hope that Koloko develops along, and then all of a sudden in 2-3 years, you're looking at Achua and Koloko potentially as your 1-2 center tandem, and they offer different things and different size and different skill sets, which is a pretty cool thing to have. So I'm very happy with what happened. There was no OG trade. They didn't go weird and sort of super off board with the pick of 33. It was a fun one to see. The kind of the annual ritual when you watch the Raptors at the draft is you look at look at the 10 guys who are available. They're 4 picks away. They're going to get someone on that list, and then they take someone you've never heard of before. Not exactly the case last night. They took a pretty consensus pick, a guy who had a first-round grade from a lot of folks, and it seems like he's going to be a pretty darn good fit with what the Raptors want to do as well. We're going to come back in a sec. We're going to dig into some of the things that Koloko does well, as hear a little bit about what his upside might be from downtown with Rafael Barlowe, who was on the show a couple weeks ago talking Koloko. We'll replay that clip coming up in just 1 second. But first, I want to tell you, better friends over at Arcade 1UP, who's got big news. Boom shakalaka, NBA Jam is back, baby. Arcade 1UP, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. It's shaped like Shaq? I don't know. I wish it was shaped like Shaq. That would be really fun. People are obsessed with NBA Jam. I'm obsessed with NBA Jam. Whenever I go to like a barcade or something, you can find me posted up in front of the NBA Jam machine playing all night long because that's all I want to do. I don't want to talk to my friends. I want to play NBA Jam, baby. You can jump clear across the court, set the ball on fire, everything you want in a sports video game. It's the most fun sports video game there ever was. And guess what? Now you can compete with friends and family through an all-new Wi-Fi leaderboard, which is just an absolute dream, making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one and up.com for an estimated early September ship date. And Arcade 1UP is the place for fun. They've got more classes like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, many others starting at just $399. What a wonderful gift idea for your favorite podcast host. If you would like to send me one, let me know. I'll DM you my address. Check this out. They are also giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your home at and go to arcade1up.com/locked-on to do so. That's arcade, the number one up.com/locked-on. You've got till July 8th to enter and win an NBA Jam Shaq edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today, and then invite me to come and play at your house. I would love to do that and spend an afternoon drinking Mountain Dew and playing NBA Jam with you. Go check them out, arcade1up.com. Okay, we continue on here with your first listen of the day, and we're going to get to Mark Schindler very shortly, but I do want to play back a section of the podcast that Rafael Barlowe recorded with me a couple weeks back here on Locked On Raptors, talking about all sorts of different guys, and Christian Koloko came up, and he came up as a guy who potentially has a swing skill that could turn him into something much more than just a rim-running defensive center, and that's his shooting. And look, he did not do a whole lot of that when he was in college. He did not, I believe, attempt a single three in his entire, I'm just pulling up his basketball reference page because I closed it for some reason, because I'm a fool. I always do this. I hit the tabs open that I need, and then I close them. Last season, he attempted a grand total of 3 threes. He's taken 5 threes in his entire college career and hit none of them. So that certainly is something to keep an eye on. It's like, okay, there's not a lot of track record here. However, as Rafael says, there are some signs here that maybe he's working on that being a part of his game, and he's sort of taking what he's seen around the NBA and what tends to get centers played off the floor in the postseason, and he's trying to not become one of said centers who gets played off the floor in the postseason. So let's play that clip, myself and Rafael Barlowe from a couple weeks ago, talking about Christian Koloko. Here's what Rafael had to say.
He is a Raptors guy, in my opinion. And so at the Combine, he shocked everybody by making 16 out of 25 threes from the star drill, which is huge because he did not make a single three-pointer in his 3 years at Arizona. And even in the 3 years at Arizona, he only made 15 jump shots total in 91 games, and 9 of those 15 came this year. So I'm very optimistic that he develops into a three-point shooter, because I believe that he just wasn't able to showcase it. I believe that he showed small strides. Like I said, he made 15 jump shots total, but 9 were this year. He was like a 35% free throw shooter as a freshman. got it up to about 73 or something like that. So he's shown improvements in his touch. And when I saw him at the combine shooting, it looked like he's been putting in the hours and putting in the work. So I even had the chance to interview him, and he told me that he understands that shooting will help him stay on the floor in the NBA, especially with centers kind of being switched off or kind of getting ran off the floor in the playoffs. And he knows that if he can add some outside shooting, it can possibly help him stay on if there's a situation where, I mean, you've seen like some of the best centers in the league. They may not have the offense to where they're just kind of one-sided. So he understood that, and so he said he's shooting 1,000 jump shots a day.
Wow.
So he gets up in the morning, shoots, then comes back at night for about 45 minutes where it's nothing but jump shots. So he's working on like the pick and pop, the mid-range, and outside, and three-point shot. So I all that to say this. I think that he has a good chance of being able to knock down open shots and space the floor. You add that to what he already brings to the table as far as energy, rim protection, and a guy that's going to be a vertical lob threat and run the floor, then you end up with a pretty valuable weapon. So he's someone that I think he could go in the first round, but I think he would be a real steal and just create so much value as a second-round pick, especially if he falls to 33.
There it is, Rafael Barlowe digging into the potential three-point upside of Christian Koloko. And look, that's a lot of ifs, right? It's a lot of, hey, he's never done it, but he's really trying to. And look, lots of guys take a lot of empty jumpers against empty, chairs and stuff like that in practice, and it doesn't always translate. But I do find that to be pretty encouraging. And it also, to me, suggests that the Raptors have kind of accomplished the thing I was hoping they would accomplish yesterday, but have kind of gotten the best of both worlds. I was really hoping they would go for someone with a very high floor who kind of projected as a role player who could fill the gaps between the likes of Siakam and Barnes and Trent and Fred and OG, like guys who are already the established sort of basis of the team. This is a team that needs guys who can play off of those guys and fit into certain roles and niches around those guys, because those guys are going to be the ones who kind of dictate what happens on the floor more often than not for this team in the next few years. And I was hoping for a high floor because that's usually a bit more of a polished player, someone who, kind of, come in, maybe you're not expecting them to have star upside necessarily, but okay, like they're going to be a pretty damn good regular rotation player in the NBA, which is a kind of a forgotten thing, and a thing that people tend to underrate, I think, is, well, everyone's got to have upside. No, sometimes you just need dudes who can play basketball and be a good seventh or eighth man. And that's how good teams are eventually constructed. But what they seem to have done with Koloko is kind of straddled that line, right? And it's now, yes, there's that floor of defense and the sort of rim running and stuff like that he brings, but now there's this sort of untapped ceiling as well, where if he can take that three-point shot and massage it along, I'm not saying he's going to even shoot threes this coming season in the NBA, but I can damn sure guarantee you the Raptors will embolden him to do so. I think that's something that you can dream on a little bit. Maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now, Christian Koloko's bombing threes away as like a true sort of both roll and popping big man who is also just a fantastic, quick-footed defender. That seems pretty exciting to me. Again, it's a second round pick. You don't want to get too crazy, but I do think this second round pick is a little more first roundy than your typical second round pick that we're talking about. So I think it's fair to probably, be able to just like hope a little bit more on that upside for a guy like Koloko. Again, he's only been playing basketball for like 5 years, which is, again, another Raptors special. So with that, we are going to now pivot into the conversation with Mark Schindler from Basketball News and Tag the Roll and all the wonderful things he does. He's fantastic. That's coming up in just 1 second as we dive deep into Christian Koloko and what he might bring to the Toronto Raptors. Before that, though, let me tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find all the latest sports developments, including league reviews and news, including this year's NHL playoffs. You got the Major League Baseball season going strong. You've got all the sort of summer events. You got tennis, golf, etc., etc. It's all there for you at betonline.net, your continued source for all your sports wagering info, so you can be the informed wagerer, get news on injuries, get podcasts to tell you what's going on, all the trends, why the lines are the way they are. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check out all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, golf, more and more and more. Head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, now closing out your first listen of the day, breaking down Christian Koloko a little bit more as a man who I simply had to get on the show when I learned he was writing about just how darn much he liked the Christian Koloko fit with the Toronto Raptors. It is Mark Schindler from Basketball News, from WNBA.com. You're everywhere, dude. You're unbelievably prolific. You watch more basketball, I think, than anybody I know. Thank you so much for hanging out today and jumping on to talk about Koloko. How are you, man?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me on. Yesterday was kind of a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to anybody who came on the Tag the World draft stream. That was an absolute blast. But yeah, no, it was a really fun day yesterday. I was a little bit bummed. I thought like not that I want to see everybody get traded, but like we kept getting this drum up like, oh, there's gonna be so many trades, like Woj and Fisher, and everybody's like, oh, there's gonna be trades. Just wait. And no, it didn't happen like that. But no, still a very, very exciting night. It's just cool on a personal note for all these guys to get their opportunities, and I'm really psyched to see what they look like next year.
Yeah, for sure. It was a fun night to watch. You know, I feel like this happens every year where it's like a million trades are going to happen. Don't worry. And
Yeah.
then it's like, oh, DeAnthony Melton's the biggest guy moved on the night. Cool. It's not a bad thing. But yeah, it usually ends up being that guys fall in love or teams fall in love with their guys and then they take them. Let's dive into Christian Koloko, shall we? The 33rd overall pick out of Arizona, 7-footer, very fast, very long, and seems to be a pretty good fit with the Toronto Raptors if you ask one Mark Schindler. Mark, let me just kind of ask you straight out, like, why do you like the fit with Koloko and the Raptors so much to the point that you wrote a blog about it this morning that will probably be up by the time we finish talking here?
Yeah. Shout out to Google Docs, man. It's a great place. It'll be up on my Patreon. But yeah, I love this because it's, you know, as we've seen, the Raptors have been increasingly linked over the last year and a half to Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert recently, Kristaps Porzingis before the trade deadline. And I think like there's been real credence to them wanting to add a center. That's not just like drummed up BS, but to me, like Koloko is very much the direction that I appreciate. Like I think to me, like obviously Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert, Kristaps, all really good, really talented players in their own right. But I think to me, that's just not the Raptors. Like, you know, I think they would have to do a lot of tinkering to bring some of those guys in on both ends. To me, Koloko is very much somebody who like, especially in terms of what he could do. Like I don't think I've written this, but I think I've said on my podcast before, like he's somebody I view who's going to be an immediate contributor next year, especially on the right team. Like,
Right.
He's very, very raw offensively. Like, let's just get that out there right away, which that's very Raptors to say, let's take the rawest guy possible. But defensively, like, he's one of the most mobile 7-footers I've ever seen. Like his movement skills are legitimately absurd at 7 feet tall, 7'5.5" wingspan. He has really good instincts defensively. Like he's not somebody I would call switchable, like fully switchable, but like because he's long, because he can move his feet well and has good timing. Like he's capable of late switching, stuff like that. I don't think like, again, I don't want to see the Raptors do a ton of switching with him. But in terms of like, we saw the Raptors start to play more stuff closer to the level, like playing, you know, Scotty and Pascal in drop close to the level as well. Like I think that's stuff that we could really see from him that just adds a new element. Like I view this team as like needing like 10 to 15 minutes of quality center play a given night. Obviously it depends on the matchup. And I think to me, Koloko is somebody who could step in and do that next year. Again, a lot's going to depend on who's out on the court with him offensively, because I do think it could gum up. Granted, like he's a real vertical threat, but his hands are pretty shitty, for being honest. Like, just to keep it blunt, like that's been the biggest hang up for him at Arizona is just catching the ball. I think he's gotten better at it, but even then, so that's going to be a big area of improvement. But again, like the defense, I think is going to be a positive from day one and fits a lot of what the Raptors like to do.
Yeah, I mean, that is typically the way the Raptors like to go, right? Is get the defensive guy, and then, yeah, we can teach this guy how to play offense, and they're pretty comfortable with that. I mean, Precious Achiuwa is kind of an example of that over the course of just this past season. He went from being an obvious plus defensively to a total ride on the offensive end, and it became less of, it's still a ride, but instead of like a roller coaster, it's more like a teacup ride that gets you a little twirled around as your dog. Well, hello, Moose. How are you?
Moose is very excited.
Loves Christian Koloko.
Yes, he does.
So yeah, let's kind of dig into like what the floor of Koloko is going into this draft. I should also say I'm a pretty uninformed draft guy. I just kind of go big picture with sort of my impressions of what I'd like the team to target in certain terms of like sort of macro skills and stuff like that. I was really hoping the Raptors could go and try to find a guy who has a pretty high floor because I feel like with the talent they already have in the door, you're looking for guys that you can kind of fill in around that to make a complete and comprehensive team. Like, not everybody can have the ball for 22% of possessions, especially when five guys are kind of sharing that load.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like getting like high floor guys who kind of fit into some sort of role player archetype to me was kind of the way to go for this team based on where they're headed in their trajectory here. Upside's obviously nice, and you never want to totally punt on upside because obviously that can kind of change your life if things go right. But Koloko, it feels like with the defense, kind of brings that floor, but there does seem to be a little bit of potential to tap into on the offensive end. What would you say is sort of like the low outcome for Christian Koloko? Like you're looking at, 5 years from now when things have gone fine, but not amazing. Like, is he still in the NBA? Is he still like a reliable rim protector you can have on the floor who can finish up the garbage and, dunk and offensive rebound and stuff like that? Or do you think there's, a world in which he kind of washes out because the offense is so far behind? What do you think of the idea of Koloko being like a high floor guy because of that defensive baseline he already has?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think I view him definitely as a high floor guy. Like, I think he's somebody I would probably play over Kem next year. Can't remember if Kem is a free agent or not.
No, he's still around 2 more years.
Okay, cool. I think like it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But I do think like he probably provides a little bit more defensively than Kem does right now, just given the size and like legitimately awesome rim protector.
Sure.
Or awesome might be a little bit too far. He's still more of a low jumper, but like, I think. I look at him as like you mentioned, I think the offense is gonna be the thing. The floor to me though, like I think he's a rotation big, like somebody who could spot start, but I think it's mostly just actually finding the offensive stuff, which like you said, I think that's gonna be the real hang up. Like how does that improve? But I think what makes this interesting to me, especially on like a team that's such a good marriage of fit and what they actually like putting on the floor. Like I view him as somebody who's going to get a ton of reps and opportunity just because of what that floor is. Sure. And I think like part of what makes talking about fit and potential interesting is like it does go hand in hand because of what Christian does so well. Like that's why I'm excited about the pick. Because I think you could take Koloko anywhere and be like, yeah, I see him making an impact. But I see this and I'm like, okay, I think I believe in the Raptors to develop some of the things that he struggles with offensively, but also I know they're going to play him. And that makes me a lot more bullish on who he can become in the league because he's going to get more of those reps and opportunities, which is what he needs offensively to really improve.
Yeah, and so on the offensive side of things, in the previous segment, we played a clip from Rafael Barlowe from Locked On NBA Big Board popping on the show a couple weeks ago when he talked about Koloko and how he had him, like he wrote a piece on 4 players with huge swing skills in the draft. The 4 players were Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith Jr., Paolo Banchero, and Christian Koloko, and he dug into the shooting upside potentially of Koloko. He did not shoot anything at all during his college career whatsoever, but Rafael did kind of note he had an interview with him, I think at the Combine. It was talking about the work he's putting in on his 3-point shot, the touch that he's trying to sort of add into his game. And, he seems at least a little bit optimistic that there could be some catch and shoot 3-point upside there for Christian Koloko at some point here. Obviously, as a roller as well, if the hands can kind of improve, that's a skill the Raptors badly need. They don't really have a traditional roll threat, haven't really had one, I don't know, since Bismack Biyombo. And, even that's a stretch considering he missed half of those buckets on the roll. But as far as the offensive upside here, like what's your level of optimism that he maybe can develop a bit of a stroke? And, when it comes to the hands and stuff like that, like is there a world in which he's just like a nice non-shooting, but, a pretty decent roll man who can be a pretty good vertical target, even if the hands maybe take some time to come along?
Yeah, no, I think that's possible. Like as for the actual shot, like that's definitely a good intel thing. Like I would love to know more. And I think again, watching him work out, seeing how he's working on things would be important. Like just to note, like he did make real strides as a free throw shooter, which that's a good indication. Also, like he has very good hand-eye coordination on the defensive end. That doesn't play out offensively right now, but I think that's the kind of indicators you're looking for. I don't know if I'd be bullish on it. Just granted, like It's not often we see somebody go from being complete non-shooter. Like this guy, he took less than 30 jumpers inside the arc last year. Like he's just not a shooter. So I guess it's possible, but I think just getting to a stage where it actually matters and the defense cares is a whole other thing. Like adding in like a corner three, I think that's potentially doable. I'd have to, I hadn't really thought about it. I'd have to go and watch, his free throw form again more and see more on what I think about it. But I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. But I think to me, a lot more of what I would consider his swing skill is, can he improve his handle a little bit? Because he is like one of the only things, like he's not a good post defender right now because he's got a pretty high base. He's still relatively like he's built, but he's like 230 at 7'1".
Sure.
So like granted, like I think he's fine for the most part, but like again, like somebody he's going to foul out playing Joel Embiid, as we all do.
Who among us?
Exactly. It's a terrible. I hate that I even said it, but like it's just like granted, like I think that shouldn't be an expectation for him to come in and be somebody who's going to body people in the post. Again, he's having 6 fouls and being long matters, though. I think that's an important thing to recognize. But yeah, the biggest swing skills for me offensively are improving his processing speed and how he sees the court, because that's a problem for some Raptors players right now. So adding him in on top of that is interesting. But I think like he can make quality passes with like the right ball placement and everything, but it's just seeing it faster. Like I think there are a lot of times where he'd get an opportunity in the mid post or something like that, and he'd make the right pass, but it's a second and a half late. Stuff like that. Like I think that's stuff that I would like to see improve. And again, though, like I think that's the kind of stuff where what level it gets to, I'm not sure of, but I do think that's something that could really just improve with time. And getting more reps, because I think that's what he really needs offensively, is trying to just see more of that, get put in a more segmented role. Like, okay, we're not going to be posting up. We're just going to have you roll, make the reads, or dunk it, or not even just dunk it. But like, I think, like developing more of a finishing touch too is going to be important as well. Like he's a good finisher, but it's mostly on lobs and just like straight up layups around the rim. Like I'm looking up the number right now. I don't think he took very many. Yeah, he took 17 floaters this year and shot well on them, granted, but like that's not a ton considering how many games. I mean, he played 37 games at Arizona this year. So like, I mean, his hook shot does have decent touch too. Shot 45% on hooks this year. I guess, the more that I think about it, he does have some like interesting flashes of touch. I just think he's still ways away from me from being somebody I consider a jump shooter, but the finishing is very real. It's a lot, again, just improving the hands, improving the way that he's seeing the court too, and making some of those reads on the short roll. And also sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like,
no, go ahead.
He's also somebody I really think they're going to need to lean into running more pick and roll with, because that's something that they have been reticent to do. I would like to see that change, especially if he's going to be on the court, because I don't think that he's somebody like he can flow into pockets well enough, but I don't view him as like somebody like Thad, who is a very like plus off ball mover that's going to open themselves up without having necessarily shooting touch or handle to get themselves somewhere. So it will be interesting to see how they employ him. But my hope with them making this pick is that they know a lot of that stuff and they're just willing to do that. But we'll see for sure.
There is hope for Malachi Flynn to find a pick and roll partner yet.
Yeah, we'll see about that one. I don't know.
The last hope, but hope nonetheless. Last one here for you, Mark. Just you mentioned off the top how you kind of liked this strategy for the Raptors to get hopefully 10 to 15 minutes of backup center play. If it doesn't work with Koloko, then you can have Birch go in there next season, and then you kind of groom Koloko along, maybe some G League time, whatever. But you seem to be kind of on board with what this says about where the Raptors are going to go with the center spot this offseason. I have been pretty staunch in my lukewarmness on the idea of going and getting like a big center, devoting a ton of resources to a really good center who's just really good and not like a superstar, because I just don't know if it's necessary for where this team is at right now. Where do you think this sort of, if you're reading the tea leaves, do you think this suggests that maybe like they're kind of done with center now, and maybe it's sort of let's go find some dudes who can handle and probably shoot with like the mid-level exception and stuff like that?
I think it'll be interesting. Like, I think like you mentioned, like, I don't know if like, looking at just MLE targets in general, I don't think that's a thing, but I do think like, okay, let's say if DeAndre Ayton is in play, like, I think that's something that you go for, like, especially too, because he's somebody I view as could fit and make a lot of sense with the Raptors. Even though he's like, again, somebody that I think you'd have to change your system a little bit for.
Even if it's an OG for Ayton swap, like,
I mean, I don't know what the valuation is.
Right.
Like, I don't know because I don't want to get cooked on YouTube comments, but also like, I mean, like, granted, that's something that does seem to be genuinely on the table. Like, now that you think about it too, like the Pistons are out on Ayton by drafting Jalen Duren. I would imagine, it would seem too that I mean, like, maybe the Knicks are open for that. Charlotte took Mark Williams last night, so it doesn't seem like they're going to be in that running anymore. So I am interested to see what happens. Maybe that does pave the way for Toronto a little bit more. But yeah, I think like it provides more of an immediate need rather than like some quote unquote star upside. So I think if like, again, it's like, I think this shuts the door on something like Miles Turner, but probably doesn't for something like if there still is interest in Ayton or Gobert. But that's just my assumption off rip.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, like the Gobert thing, I've kind of put to bed because I just think it's too complicated money wise.
Yeah,
like it would
definitely.
have to be like both Trent and OG. And that point, you're like really leaning into the whole we don't have any shooters identity. Which hey, maybe that's what.
Well,
they
exactly.
wanna do.
And I think I don't mean to go off on your pod, but like I
No.
was thinking about this the other day because I was talking to Hoop Goose and Samson Folk, two of our good friends. And
they're fine.
At first,
Samson particularly,
they're fine. They're
fine,
okay.
whatever.
They I was thinking about it first and I was like, yeah, Ayton to the Raptors makes a ton of sense. But then I thought about it too. I'm like, you cannot trade Gary Trent unless you're getting back another movement shooter because like who else on this team is a movement shooter? Like Fred, of course, but like he's handling the ball more.
Fee's opted in, man.
I legitimately forgot that Svi was on this team until he got re-upped the other day. I mean, until he accepted his player option the other day. I was like, wow. First of all, I didn't know he had a player option. Props to his agent because I don't know how that happened, but this team is. I'm very excited for this team next year. I think again, sleep on Pascal at your own peril, man. The Pascal. I'm sorry. I'm not just trying to cultivate.
Don't apologize, man. Go nuts.
Right now,
we love Pascal propaganda on this podcast.
That redraft thing came out last week, and I was like, Pascal is incredible. I don't know what people are doing here. Like, I'm interested to see what this team does next year because they're fun, man.
Yeah,
just don't bring up the Thad trade. Yesterday was the Thad relitigation day. So,
which I made the point at the very start of this show is silly. There's a chance the Raptors would have taken Koloko at 20 anyway, based on what they were saying. Like they seem to have gotten their guy just fine, and also they have Thad's bird rights, and got to watch him throw cool passes and teach the youths for a little while.
Hey, I mean, just for the step back on Joel Embiid, that's all we needed.
Honestly, worth the 13 spot drop. I'm sorry if you liked Malachi Branham at 20, but I think everything is all good there. Mark, thank you so much for popping on, man. It's always a wonderful time to have you on, and we'll have to have you on a lot over the next 10 years because I made the point last night. Detroit, Cleveland, and Toronto. It's three teams that you seem to have a particular affinity for. You're obviously based in Cleveland. That's going to be like the triangle of death in the Eastern Conference for the next 8, 9, 10 years. That's going to be awesome. I can't wait to take many a Greyhound bus along that route.
Oh, God. The Cleveland Greyhound station is not my favorite. I actually almost got mugged outside of it one time, which was not fun. But, I mean, the Central Division is going to own basketball, it seems. So we're going to see what happens.
It's going to be a blast. Mark, thank you so much. Where can people check out your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MG_Schindler. If you want to read more about Christian Koloko, I should have a piece coming out, probably right before this drops. So, check me out there. Appreciate you for having me on, Sean. It's always a fun time.
Of course, man. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Later on today, there will be a bonus episode for you with Mike Luke of Locked On Wildcats. He's going to give us the lowdown, little Christian Koloko 101 from someone who watched him every single game throughout the season with Arizona. That'll be a little bonus show, probably just about 15 minutes or so later on today on YouTube and on the audio platform. So thank you for checking us out. Thank you for making us both your first and second listen today. But if you need another podcast to go check out, go listen to Locked On NBA Big Board, all sorts of breakdowns of the draft, and surely a look ahead at Wemby time, the 2023 draft with Victor Wembanyama. He's got everybody in a tizzy. Surely Mark as well. We will reconvene on Monday with a full episode with Big V, as we usually do, and look ahead towards free agency as it gets set to open next week. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you again on Monday or later this afternoon. I keep forgetting because I've signed myself up for a bonus episode. We'll talk to you soon, all right, with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye.